If you're not sure, then who are you?
What's up, guys, and welcome back to Underground Audience Secrets. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into Severance Season 2, Episode 4, Woes Hollow. So, a lot of you may have been checking this episode out this week, but let's take a deep dive in some of the things that you probably didn't pay attention to, or maybe you missed. So, one of the first things that happened is Irvin appears on this ice lake by himself in the middle of what appears to be a frozen over iced uh iced lake. So one of the things we notice here is that the elevator ding is one of the first things, if not the first things you hear on this episode. Now, what does that indicate? To me, that indicates that they have just been severed or brought back out of whatever trance state or they have been in when they get into the elevators from to when they get out of the elevators. What's interesting here is they do play the ding, letting you know that they've just woken back up. But Irvin appears on the ice by himself. Then you see Mark S. Maybe 300 yards away on the top of a cliff, which we can assume he was woken up in that area. And then obviously Helly R says she's come back from a clip, but we'll get to that later. And you have Dylan G, who appears on a completely different area of this, what seems to be frozen forest or national forest. Now, what's interesting about that is when the Audis go into the elevator and the elevator dings, we assume that that's maybe an instantaneous process or 10, 15 seconds goes by and it takes them to the severed floor and they just wake up there and they go on about their day. But we don't know how long they're in this trance-like state or state between any consciousness and outer consciousness to where something could actually happen to them. In other words, when they go into the elevator as an outie, when it dings, we don't know. There could be a setting that allows them to be in a trance state for 30 minutes, hours, maybe even days, where a person can come in and dress them or change them or do whatever to their physical bodies until they're woken back up on the seventh floor or obviously wherever they want them to appear, right? And it seems like they're appearing right now in a forest. Now, we later come to find out that this is Dieter's national forest, which is a whole nother thing in itself. But just to think the ding to me, and a lot of people I haven't seen really touch this, uh, indicates that they have been brought there specifically, and each of them have been brought to a different specific area. It's not like on the separate floor where the elevator dings and they all come out on pretty much the same elevator at different time points. They're all appearing in different physical locations. Okay, so this leads me to believe that a person can be severed or in between any and outie consciousness for a period of time. Now, that's just a theory, but really think about that. How do they all appear in different physical areas, hundreds of yards or feet away from each other, and they're all woken up in these different areas? Just something to think about, right? Then we see once they've all found each other, the first time you see the cliff, when Mark looks over, I believe he looks left, you actually don't see anything. Then he looks and Helly and Irvin appear. They find Dylan, and then he looks back left, and magically there is a TV and what seems to be a DVD player and a remote, right? And somehow it has power. There's clearly no plug out in the wilderness. Um, and somehow there's a DVD which allows him to start playing Milchek. And even if you look at Milchek on the screen, he looks kind of robotic, almost as if that footage had been edited to create this training like atmosphere. Um, and so he goes on then to talk about what they're there for, which is ORTBO or TBO, which is ultimately a team building exercise for the four. Now, a lot of people have been saying transpose those letters, you get robot. I'm not too sure what to do with that right now because I don't have enough anecdotal evidence to prove that there are actual robots in here. Now, animatronics, which is referred to, I think, in episode one, I believe that is what the four are seeing. So when Haley R sees her, I guess, quote unquote, twin, Dylan G, Irvin B, they all see their twins. I do believe those are animatronics, which is why they're far away. And that's supposed to be, uh, I guess, connect to how Kier and Dieter, which is apparently this secret brother that he's had uh, this entire time that nobody's mentioned, that's supposed to be the equivalent of them having their own twin or representative of them having their own twin, which ties back into duality. I think that's complete nonsense. I don't think there's any real truth to that. I think that's simply an exercise in psychological control over Irvin, um, Dylan G. Haley, and Mark. And I think that is a way to maintain control. We're going to use the story of the twin, and eventually they're going to talk about what happens to the twin as a to send a subtle message, or maybe not so subtle message to the four. All right. Now, another thing that was interesting is that you hear the hymn playing, which is, if you remember, Miss Cobell was singing the Kier hymn. You hear that playing as they're playing the DVD or getting ready to play the DVD. Um, that seems like that is a clue to the lore of Kier Egan, right? Kind of a clue as to everything that's going on now in this scene, in this episode, what this DVD story is pointing towards, all goes back to this Kier hymn. And you can look up the lyrics if you go back to that scene or Cobell is singing it. Well, basically, it's just singing praises to Kier and his ability to master the four tempers, right? So that's just kind of a subtle touch we see there. Now, one of the theories I've been seeing is that Deerder National Forest is a basically an illusion. I don't think it's an illusion for the simple fact that we have to account for another part or end of this episode where Irvin is essentially trying to drown Helena. And if it were an illusion or some type of psychological trip or um, play on visuals through their severed chip, I don't think that would be the case. Also, I don't think that would instill fear in Milchek if he knows this water is not real. Helena cannot drown. Um, I don't think it would instill that type of fear. So the actual physical area, at least in part, is a real area. Now there may be some parts of that area that is fraught with illusions. One of the things you notice is when they go to get the book that talks about the theater, there's the book with the Roman numeral 4 on it. And if you look in the cave, there's for some reason a fluorescent light bulb mounted and a book mounted in a cave, which is completely unnatural, which is a clue that at least this has been manipulated by someone in Lumen to make this happen. Now, one of the things that this show is really, really, really good at is misdirection. And a lot of us are paying so close attention to Helena and Heli R and whether or not Heli R is really Heli R as an any or whether or not she's Helena on the inside. And later we find out in the episode exactly who she is. But one of the things that I think the show is doing a great job of doing is actually showing what I believe is another character who is also reintegrated. Now, hear me out. If you go back and look at Urban B's personality in season one, at least for the first six episodes, he's very by the book. He's very all in on Lumen Industries. He's very, I guess you would say, obedient to the Kier lore and the Egan way of doing things. He knows a lot about the company, a lot about the handbook, etc. If you just transpose that personality to how he acts, the language he uses, the amount in which he curses, how paranoid he is, how confrontational he is, how physical he is, in this last episode, it's almost as if it's two completely different people, or if it's his innie as well as his outie. So here's another reason I think that that is going to be the case. When you hear Ragabi talk about, I've gotten better at this, so all we know is that she's tried this on PD. It obviously went horribly wrong, right? So now, if she said she's gotten better at this, how could she have known she's gotten better unless she's tried this on at least one other person to know that she's compare results? Otherwise, there'd be no way for her to know if she's gotten better at it, right? So if she's done this to Irving's Audi and reintegrated him, this would be why he's able to pull information from both sides, both his innie and his outie, and his personality traits, which probably more of his outie, which would be more of the military man, the more defiant, the more aggressive. He curses a lot more in this last episode than he did in the beginning episodes, is because you're seeing his innie and his outie reintegrated, and both pieces of their personalities are merged, and the paranoia, all of these things, also coupled with the fact of loss since he's not able to be around Bert as well. So a lot of people aren't really paying attention to that, but they're intentionally doing having a very, very, very intense character arc for Urban B, and they've developed his character fast, very fast. It's a strong shift from who he was introduced to be. So something to think about. Now we know they talk about, and I won't go into too much detail if you saw the episode. They talk about the tale of Kier and Dieter and their I guess you would call it adventures in the outdoors. Um, and they also get into detail into why eventually Dieter, however you want to pronounce it, eventually he crosses a line by, quote, spilling his lineage on the soil. And from there, he essentially dies, or seems like he becomes one with the earth. However you, but it gets very graphic as Milchick is reading the story, and his the way that he looks at the surrounding severed employees or unsevered employees lets you know that he's trying to send a message that defiance or disobedience or going against a rule results in a harsh penalty like this, right? It's just like, you would use this, and they use this a lot in organized religions where they'll tell a story which tells you, hey, avoid doing this or there could be severe consequences of this. So that's clearly what he's trying to do by sitting him around a campfire and telling him this story, right? Now, one of the things you have to notice, this is where it gets tricky, because now we have Helena, which we find out later in the episode, who is posing as Helly, basically making fun of this story that Milchick is reading about Dieter and Kier. Now, here's the interesting part about that. Because of what we know about the end of the episode, and that this is actually Helena around the campfire, she's essentially stepping on Milchek's efforts to get this point across to the rest of the group. Now, why would she do that is a bigger question. Now, maybe she just feels like she knows this story, in my opinion, is complete nonsense. It's made up, manufactured to get this point across, and she's just trying to lean into Hilly R's personality. So she's just gonna kind of laugh at it to kind of get the group to think, oh yes, this really is Hilly R. But it comes across as rude, which I think doesn't really do the trick for the group because they're like, it still kind of comes across as cruel. Then when she gets pressed or confronted by Irvin B asks her about the OTC, which what did you see on the outside? And she gets defensive and she hurls out an insult about him never seeing Bert ever again. And when that happens, you can tell that she's become cruel. And we can see it before Bert actually verbalizes it. It's like, that's a little intense for Helly R. If you go back and look at how she is in season one, it's not something that's characteristic of her. But to go back, to tie back into what Milchek and actually Helena's interaction is you also have to look at this again from Milchek's point of view. Because I believe they're building up another, what I think could be a potential turn, character turn for Milchek. Because if you paid very close attention, he's been getting slightly disrespected for the first 3 to 4 episodes. Here's what I mean by that. We see that when he gets promoted, he asks for his name to be shown on the screen. The screen still shows Miss Cobell. He's asking it for it to be changed to Mr. Milchek or Milchek, whatever he wants on that screen. And we can see clearly days after they still haven't bothered to even make that simple change for him. Also, you see him get referred to as Seth a lot, even by Natalie. Obviously, the big reveal of the I guess you want to say cultural appropriation of Kier eating paintings that he received, which are clearly offensive, even though he can't really show it to him. He's kind of like, what is the point of this gift? Is this supposed to be something I appreciate? But he just kind of grins and bears it. But that's kind of another strike of this is offensive. Then you have Helena Egan, which at minimum, she would be an executive level employee at Lumen, if not the head of everything, which I think she's more than likely probably active CEO, but we'll see. The head of everything, who's ridiculing his story. And my money is on he's probably the one who came up with the idea, put together the plan to take them on this, I guess you want to call it, field trip. Also, he's probably put together the whole strategy on how he's going to get this message across so that they can eventually get the MDR team to continue working on their files and complete Cold Harbor. And here comes, quote unquote, his boss, who just throws an unnecessary wrench in the plan. So, as much as he's mad at the MDR employees, he's also mad at Helena because he's like, you're screwing this up. I spent all this time trying to you asked me to do this, and you come in here and you say this, you screw this up. You don't respect my work here. So that kind of is what I think the whole throw the marshmallows in the fire was really about. Um, Not that he could do anything, but it was more so frustration on you're ruining what I'm trying to do here. So keep an eye on how Lumen continues to disregard or minimize Milchick's effort to serve their cause. Just keep an eye on that. Now, guys, keep an eye on something that occurs throughout this episode. If you remember, Milchek says, "Hey guys, this is the tallest waterfall on the face of the earth." Now, this is clearly a lie. You could make the argument that since they're severed and it's the only waterfall they're seeing, it's not a lie, but it's objectively a lie, right? So, one, it's an unnecessary lie, but it kind of shows us the ability that Milchik has to lie for no apparent reason without breaking stride, right? So just keep an eye on the dishonesties. So Milchik is very good at either giving half truths or just flat out lying without breaking any character or seeming awkward. So that's something that they throw in there to just show you, hey, you can't really trust what this character says because he could lie to you. He could be looking you right in the face and lying. Now, the other thing you can tie to that is throughout this whole episode, and maybe some people have covered this, but it doesn't get talked about enough, is that Milchick and even Miss Wong, they seemingly just appear. I mean, they don't announce themselves. You don't see them. They're not staying in a specific tent, cabin, or anything. They just appear. Camera just pans, and then they're just magically there, right? Even when Irvin is holding his candle and going through the night, screaming for Milchek, he apparently can't hear. I mean, wherever he's at, I mean, I feel like he's simply observing from wherever he is. I think he does hear him, but he's nowhere to be found. And then when there's time for the next exercise of what they have to do, whether they're on their trail, or whether they're getting ready to go to the campfire, or whether, Irving is confronting him, and he just magically appears. We don't know where he comes from, where Miss Wong comes from. We don't know where they go when they leave a scene. So, what do we do with this information? How are they, if they're unsevered employees, at least Milchek, from what we believe, how is he appearing and reappearing? Unless there are secret compartments, trapdoors, things that we can't see where he just disappears into. And since he knows the layout, maybe he knows how to get in and get out at certain moments. I feel like it's in a situation where, kind of like an interrogation room, where he can sit behind a door and watch everything that's going on outside and then just pop in and appear when he needs to appear. And I think this is somehow a part of the training room or team building room, I would say. Uh, we don't know how that works yet, but essentially it's almost like deception again, because he just appears conveniently when things need to happen or when there's some type of danger, real danger. So when we see Irvin confront Helena to tell her, "Hey, I know you're an Egan," after everything that he sees in his dream state while he falls asleep in the forest, uh, and he grabs her, physically grabs her, takes her to the water, and you see Dylan and you see Dylan and Mark talking. You see them talking to Milchek, and then you hear a scream, "Mr. Milchek," and it obviously sounds like Irvin and Helly. Then he takes off running because he knows that that's danger. So now he can hear all of a sudden. This is very interesting if you pay attention to how his character transitions in and out of scenes. All right, guys, now this is where it gets interesting. At the very end, where Urban B basically is trying to drown Helena in the river or water, whatever body of water that is, you hear Milchek on the actual walkie talkie say, "Remove the Glasgow block." And he says it twice, I believe. Right now, if you think about that, when they actually do remove it, you see her eyes open up and she switches back to Heli R. Now, here's what that makes me believe. That means the elevators aren't necessarily required to flip you from any to a Audi's uh, consciousness, right? So Here's what I mean by that. In theory, if this is the case, they should be able to walk Mark S, Irving B, Dylan G, all of them out into this national forest, and then at will basically remote in and say, hey, hit the switch, sever them now, and then they just boom, wake up where they woke up. That would make a lot more sense. I think the assumption is that we think that they need this elevator in order to sever them. And I think Lumen has been hiding the fact that when they insert these severance chips in you, they can actually activate your innie or your outie remotely whenever they want to. The reason they don't do it is because I'm sure that's against a law or ethics violation, whatever kind of code of conduct that is out there. But it's starting to feel like they can sever from anywhere. Another bit of evidence from that is in season one, where you have the lady who is having a child. I think it was the governor's wife. She's having a child. And then she says she uses that to basically not have to go through the whole childbirth process. She doesn't say whether she uses it daily or she has someone sever her for 7, 8 months into an innie, and then after or 9 months until after she has a baby, and then unsevers her so where she didn't have to go through that. So they never get that specific. But one thing we do know is that she never mentioned that she had to get in an elevator or go to Lumen and step in a contraption in order to be severed or unsevered. So the big thing, and I'm glad you guys stuck around this video that this long to hear, is I don't think they actually need the facility of Lumen to switch you from any to outie consciousness. And if that's the case, this ties back into the season one reveal where James Egan talks about soon everyone will have a chip and they'll all be basically disciples of Kier. And if he gets chips in enough people, then when he's ready, or when Lumen is ready, they can essentially flip the switch and turn thousands of people into innies and get them to do what they want them to do in mass. Right? So I think that's what that episode is trying to reveal if you pay very close attention to how things are done. It's not just that Helly got switched back over, it's the fact that she didn't need an elevator or any type of contraption to do it. They are able to do it at will wherever they are. Maybe they are in the Lumen building. I don't know. But I would doubt that they are in a place where she had to be in a very particular location in order for them to switch her to her severed consciousness. So be on the lookout to see if they're going to start to reveal that these characters can, and I believe they can, be switched from any to outie consciousness, which will allow for basically remote controlled human consciousness from wherever Lumen wants to, whatever their bigger vision or bigger goal is. And when more people get severance chips put in their head, the more that they'll be able to control at a specific period of time. But they cannot reveal that now, because if they do reveal that now, they won't, enough people will not volunteer with it. You wouldn't volunteer to get the chip in your head if you knew the company could manipulate you at any time, at any place, anywhere on earth. So I think the Glasgow block might not be the Glasgow box specifically, but there's, several other. You see Beehive, that I think that is leaning towards what I'm talking about here. But Beehive is basically thousands of bees working in unison towards one goal. So this is what I feel is going to be part of the mission. Maybe that has something to do with Cold Harbor, maybe it doesn't, but it's definitely going to play a part, because I think Severance is showing us in this episode we don't need elevators to play with your consciousness and switch you from in and out of consciousness. right? So, with that being said, the last thing I want to talk about is Helena. I see people talking about Helena is using her strategies to talk to Mark and the tent and try to pose as, my Audi is really a bad person, or I don't like who I am on the outside. I believe that's what she says. And she seems vulnerable. And he said, well, maybe Helena is really vulnerable. I don't believe a word of that. I think Helena is evil. I think the person we were introduced to in season one is very cold and calculated. And I think all of that is manufactured emotion. And I think she will probably end up being the big villain by the end of the season, if not one of the big villains. So I wouldn't really fall for that trap of Helena's, jealous of being the freedom that Heli R has in the severed floor. I'm not gonna go that far. Selena seems at peace with the cold-hearted individual she is on the outside. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Make sure to like and subscribe, do all that good stuff on the channel. And I look forward to breaking down the next episode, which is episode 5, Trojan's Horse.